I started jogging at night about a year ago. I switched to nighttime jogs because there's less car and bike traffic to deal with. Plus, it's usually cooler at night since I'm not a fan of running in the heat of the day. Usually, I stick to the well-lit streets around my neighborhood. But one night, I decided to explore a new route through a less familiar part of town. It was a beautiful night out, and I just finished my regular 5 miles, and I felt good, so I kept going. I headed into an area with fewer streetlights, and these streets were deserted. Only the occasional car passed by, and the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement was really the only noise. I rounded a corner onto a street that I had never been down before. The houses were older, and the yards were not as well maintained. I figured I'd just make a loop through the neighborhood and then head back home. A few blocks in, I noticed a man walking ahead of me on the other side of the street. A short time later, it took me a while to realize it, but I saw that the man had now crossed over to my side of the street and was jogging behind me. I thought this was odd because he had been walking before, and now he was running the same route that I was going, seemingly following me. He was moving steadily, like he was matching my speed, and every time I picked up the pace, he did too. It was subtle, but it made me uncomfortable. Wanting to see what would happen, I slowed down my pace, and when I did, he did as well. I then quickened my steps, and again he matched me. He was far enough behind me that whenever I would glance back, I couldn't see his face clearly. But he was wearing dark clothes, and his movements were steady and deliberate. I tried to think rationally that maybe it was a coincidence, but I still felt uneasy. I approached a street where the lighting was better, hoping to feel a little bit safer. I glanced back and saw that the man had turned onto the street behind me. He was still following at a distance, but unmistakably following me now. I didn't want to confront him or make it obvious that I was scared, but I wanted to lose him before going back home. I decided to head towards a more populated area, hoping to lose him in the crowd. I took a few more turns, running faster than usual. Each time I looked back, the man was still there, moving through the shadows. It was like he was determined to stay out of the streetlights, making it harder for me to get a good look at him. Finally, I saw a group of people gathered outside of a bar. They were chatting and laughing, and I went towards them. As I approached, I took one last look behind me. The man had stopped at the edge of the lighted area, just standing there, watching. I sprinted the rest of the way to the bar and stopped, trying to catch my breath. Looking back, I saw the man turn and walk away, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed at the bar for a while, and even went to get some water to pass the time just in case. When I finally felt like enough time had passed, I jogged back home, sticking to well-lit streets and staying close to houses. I didn't see the man for the rest of my jog, and after that night, I stuck to areas that I knew well and where I usually jogged. I've been jogging through my neighborhood for years, sticking mostly to familiar routes. One time, it was a quiet evening, just cool enough to make running pleasant. I ended up taking a route that I ran quite often on a street where the houses are old and the streetlights are spaced really far apart. On this route, there was this one house which had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. The yard was overgrown, the paint on the house was peeling, and the windows were boarded up. I asked my parents once why it had been abandoned for so long, and they told me that somebody had died tragically inside and nobody wanted to buy it, so it just sat there rotting. That night, as I ran past the abandoned house, I noticed something strange. The house's front door, which had always been securely boarded up, was slightly open. The boards were still there, but they looked loose, like somebody had forced their way in. I slowed down, trying to see if anything else was out of place. I noticed a faint light flickering inside. I thought that it might be a trick of the streetlights or maybe a reflection, but the light was too consistent. It looked like a candle or a small lamp, and it was moving, bouncing up and down as if somebody was walking with it. I stopped running and I approached the house cautiously. Peering through the gap in the door, I noticed shadows moving around inside. It was difficult to make out any details, but the movement was unmistakable. There were at least 2 figures moving inside. It could easily have been a group of kids who felt brave and wanted to explore in an abandoned building. I was about to continue my run, but something was drawing me in, and I decided to stay. At first, I had a thought that maybe it was just some kids inside, but I doubted myself as I smelled heavy cigar smoke, and I questioned why someone exploring wouldn't just use a flashlight instead of candles. The shadows were more distant now, as more candles had been lit and I could see better inside. There were plenty of shadows revealing that it was a group of people inside, but all I could make out was the figure of a person sitting in a chair. The figure was making a lot of hand gestures and seemed to be talking about something passionately. I could hear muffled voices, but they were too quiet to understand. Just then, one of the boards from the front door that I had been leaning on snapped a little, making a sharp popping noise. The figure that was sitting in the chair was quiet and shifted their body towards the front door before quickly moving and blowing out the candles. I had revealed that I was there with the snapping of the wood, and I wasn't going to wait around to see what happened next. I felt a rush of fear, and I took off running. I didn't stop until I reached the street that my house was on. When I got home, I thought about calling the police, but I wasn't even sure what I would tell them that I had seen. I really didn't know. The next day on my way to work, I drove past the abandoned house again. The front door was closed, and the boards were patched across it again, with no sign of activity inside. Now, on every jog I go down the street with the abandoned house, I'm curious to see if there's any activity inside, but I haven't seen anything else since that night. I like going on jogs to stay in shape, and even when I'm on vacation, I usually find a way to get a run in. I stayed at my cabin for a few days on a weekend in September. The cabin was situated on a dirt road that wound through a dense forest. It's peaceful there, which is exactly what I was looking for. The sun was setting as I set out for my jog, and the light was starting to fade. I was used to running on these roads, so the diminishing light didn't bother me. As I ran, the road became darker, and the trees seemed to close in around me. I kept my pace steady, trying to clear my mind. There's something about running alone in the woods that makes you acutely aware of your surroundings. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig makes you wonder if an animal is out there. Halfway through my run, an old pickup truck passed me by going the other way. Normally, I didn't see any cars out there, but there were other cabins nearby. I never really tried to stop by or get to know any of the other owners of the cabins on the road, but I figured that they were pretty normal people. I finished the loop I was jogging, and as I arrived, I turned up the driveway towards my cabin. The old pickup truck drove past me again, and the man inside gave me a friendly wave. I didn't think much of it at the time, as I didn't know anybody who lived in the neighboring cabins. By the time I got back to the cabin, it was dark. I let myself in, went through my usual routine of showering and preparing dinner, and then I settled down on the couch with a book. Later that night, close to 10 p.m., once it had gotten fully dark, I heard the sound of a car engine far away, but it sounded closer to my cabin than it should have, like they had gone up the driveway a little bit. I then heard heavy footsteps on the porch and the unmistakable sound of somebody trying to turn the doorknob. My heart started pounding in my chest. I called the police, but my cabin was in the middle of nowhere, so I was told it would be a little while before they arrived. I knew I had to protect myself if it came to that, so I grabbed a heavy flashlight and a broom. Not exactly ideal weapons, but it was all that I had. Whoever was outside began pounding on the door. It sounded like they were really trying to force their way in. After a while, the banging stopped, and I could hear the intruder's footsteps moving quickly, circling the cabin, looking for another entrance, I presume. Thankfully, all the windows were on the second level and out of reach of the intruder, unless they had a ladder. Eventually, I heard a car engine start and the intruder drive away. When the police arrived, I didn't have much to tell them besides earlier when I was on my jog, the man in the old pickup truck had driven by me twice. The officer notified me that he had actually driven by the truck on the way to the cabin, and he might have his license plate on camera. Nothing eventful happened the rest of the nights that I was staying in the cabin, and I never heard back from the police department either. I guess they didn't catch a license plate, or it wasn't worth investigating, since it was just a hunch based on a truck that I had seen earlier that night while jogging. When I decided to take a weekend vacation at a rural Airbnb, I was hoping for some peace and quiet. The listing had promised beautiful scenery and a cozy place to stay on a working farm. I'm not one for the farm life, but the idea of waking up to the sound of birds and getting some fresh air sounded perfect. On the second morning of my stay, I woke up early. I've been trying to get back into a jogging routine, so I thought this would be the perfect place to do it. I got dressed, laced up my sneakers, and headed out the front door. The farmhouse was surrounded by a large open field with a few scattered barns. I started jogging along a dirt path that seemed to wind around the edge of the property. It was peaceful, and I found myself settling into a comfortable rhythm. After about a mile, I noticed a small, overgrown path leading off into the woods. I wasn't planning to go that way, but something about it piqued my curiosity. I decided to see where it went, and I turned off the main path to follow the narrower trail. It was less maintained, with branches reaching out and the ground uneven beneath my feet. This path led me deeper into the woods, and soon I could no longer see the farmhouse or the fields. I was still enjoying the jog until I came upon a clearing. At first, it looked like just another open space in the woods, but then I saw something odd. In the middle of the clearing was an old broken-down structure. It looked like a shed or a small cabin, but it was partially collapsed and covered in thick vines. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and the windows were either boarded up or shattered. I slowed to a walk and approached the building. Peering through one of the broken windows, I could see a dusty interior with old furniture covered in cobwebs. There was a rusted metal shelf with what looked like old jars and cans, but nothing that really caught my eye. I decided to take a few pictures with my phone. I wanted to show them to the Airbnb host later and ask about the building, just out of curiosity. Later that day, I mentioned the weird structure to the host when I saw them in the kitchen. Their reaction was immediate and unsettling. They went pale and said, "Oh, you found that place? You shouldn't go near it." When I asked why, they avoided eye contact and said that it wasn't safe and had been abandoned for years. Later that evening, as I reviewed the photos on my phone, I noticed something disturbing. In one of the pictures of the inside of the building, there was a figure, just a shadowy outline, standing in the corner of the room. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a result of the poor photo quality, but the figure looked too defined to be a mere glitch. The next Monday, after returning from my weekend trip, I couldn't stop thinking about the building and my photos of the place. When I got home from work, I did a quick search online to see if I could come by any information on the property. To my surprise, I found an old news article from decades ago. It was about a family that lived on the farm, but they had mysteriously disappeared. There were no leads or explanations, just an empty farmhouse and an investigation that had gone cold. I got chills just sitting in my house as I read the article about what I had stumbled across on my jog unknowingly. It was a cool fall morning when I decided to go for a jog. I had just moved to a new city and was trying to get into a routine. The neighborhood I was in seemed nice enough, and the streets were quiet in the early morning. I set out at around 6 a.m., thinking it would be a peaceful start to the day. The route that I chose was a loop through a park and some quiet streets nearby. The park was a bit secluded, with only a few early risers walking their dogs. I jogged along the path, enjoying the crisp air and the sound of leaves crunching under my feet. Everything felt normal until I made my way to the street section of my route. As I turned onto a side street, I noticed a man walking towards me. He looked disheveled, but I didn't think much of it. I gave him a polite nod and continued jogging. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw the same man had turned around and was walking quickly in my direction. Before I could react, he was right beside me. I slowed down, feeling uneasy. He said hello, his voice gravelly. I was about to say something when he suddenly grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, and I felt a rush of panic. "Give me your stuff," he demanded. I tried to pull away, but he was stronger than I expected. I saw a small knife in his hand, barely visible, but enough to make me realize that he wasn't playing around. I was on a jog, so the only thing of importance that I had was my fitness watch, which I handed to him. He backed away slowly, still watching me closely. "Just stay there," he said, before turning and running off down the street. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't call the police until I jogged back home, and I gave them a description over the phone of the guy and where it all happened. I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to something much worse. The knife had been so close, and I wondered what might have happened if I had resisted. I lost my watch, which sucked, but I was thankful that I hadn't been hurt. What didn't make much sense to me was that the guy tried to rob me while I was on a run. He couldn't have thought that he was getting much stuff from the robbery. In the end, I never found out what happened to the man or if he was caught. It was scary how it happened so quickly and escalated to a dangerous level over a watch at 6 a.m. in the morning. My family has always loved to go on a lot of hikes. Now that my siblings and I are a little older, we don't go as often, but every now and then, we still get a fun family hike on a weekend. This particular Saturday, we had gone out as a family to hike this smaller mountain trail. The trail would take us to a nice view of a little waterfall and river area. The hike was great, and at the top, we stopped to eat lunch, having some sandwiches and other items that we had packed. We spent some time swimming in the cool river. Then, as evening approached, we began to make our way back down the mountain to the parking lot area. As we got close to the end of our hike, our dad abruptly stopped us and pointed down the mountain. From where we were on the trail, even though it was still a good 10-minute walk down, we could see the parking lot from our vantage point. At the time, our car was the only one in the parking lot. In the distance, it was clear to see someone was circling around the car. We stopped walking down the trail and just watched as they looked through all the windows of the car and then pulled on all the doors to see if they were unlocked. Finally, we watched in horror as the person climbed into the bed of the truck, pulling the top cover out as well, concealing themselves in the bed of our truck. This seemed to really make my dad angry as he called 911, and then we quickly descended the rest of the trail. As we got close to the bottom, but still a good distance from our car, my dad began yelling to get the attention of whoever was in the back of our truck. My dad yelled some profanities and said to get out of our truck and leave. The person hopped out of the back bed of our truck. We were close enough to see now that it was a man. He walked around our truck one last time, slashing all 4 tires, and then slowly walked away. He began to just wander around the parking lot area, disappearing in the trees sometimes, and then would come back out. We couldn't leave because he had slashed all the tires. We just tried to stay as far away from him as possible, staying at the other edge of the large parking lot across from wherever he was. The cops eventually showed up and detained the guy. We found out that the guy had been doing antics like this before in different spots around the area. Other hikers' cars had been messed with and tires slashed. It was a scary end to our hike, but it felt good to know that the guy had been caught and wouldn't harm any other hikers or their cars. It was a crisp autumn night when I decided to go for a hike. I needed to clear my mind, and being out in nature always helped. It was a fairly easy hike that I had chosen to do, just a quick evening hike. I parked my car at the trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and started up the path. The trail was narrow but well marked. As I walked, I noticed a few people coming down, but there were no others on the path going up. An hour or so into the hike, I heard someone behind me. It was a bit unusual because the trail was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, but I was alone. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was someone who started later or took a different route. I quickened my pace a little, hoping to stay ahead of whoever it was. I glanced back occasionally and saw no one, yet the sound of footsteps followed me steadily. I tried to focus on the beauty of the hike, hoping that whoever was back there would turn off on another path. After another mile, I took a short break by a small stream. I sat on a rock, drank some water, and listened carefully. The footsteps had stopped. I felt a brief relief, but was still uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, maybe someone on the trail who had their pace slowed down. I continued on as the sun was getting lower and shadows lengthened across the path. The feeling of being followed returned though. I'd hear footsteps, then silence. I would turn around and see nothing but trees and rocks. I could hear the footsteps clearly now, almost as if they were matching my pace. I picked up my speed, hoping to reach the summit soon. I reached a viewpoint where the trail widened a bit. I decided to stop and look over the valley below. I needed a break and hoped that whoever was following me might have stayed back. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing there. I thought I saw a shadow move among the trees, but it could have been my imagination. The sun was setting, and I knew I had to make it back before dark. I started down the trail, moving faster than before. The footsteps had returned, closer now. I was terrified, and tried not to look back, afraid of what I might see. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure ahead of me on the path. It was a man, dressed in hiking gear. I called out to him, hoping that he was a fellow hiker who might have some information or could help. He didn't respond, just stood there, facing away from me. I approached cautiously, calling out again. The figure didn't move. When I was close enough to see his face, he turned around slowly. His expression was blank, and he didn't say a word. His eyes seemed distant, as if he wasn't really seeing me. I took a step back, really freaking out at this point. I decided to take another path that led off the main trail, hoping to avoid any further confrontation. I went faster, hearing the footsteps still behind me, but never quite seeing anyone. When I finally reached the parking lot, I looked back up the trail, but there was nobody in sight. I checked my car quickly and drove off as fast as I could. Later, I told a few friends about what happened, but they mostly shrugged it off as my imagination. Every time I think about that day, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me the whole time. The memory of those footsteps, always just behind me, still haunts me. Last summer, I decided to take a break from my busy life and go hiking in the woods near my town. I usually hiked alone, but this time I brought my two dogs, Max and Bella. They're both friendly and love the outdoors, so I figured they'd enjoy the hike as much as I would. I parked at the trailhead and set off on the main path. Max and Bella were trotting ahead and sniffing just about everything in sight. After a while, the trail began to climb steeply. I was sweating and breathing hard, but Max and Bella seemed to be handling it just fine. Then I heard someone behind us. I looked back and saw a man who was wearing a dark jacket and seemed to be hiking at a slower pace, but he was gaining on us. I had a strange feeling about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him made me uneasy. He gave me a half-hearted wave and a forced smile. I forced a smile back and then quickened my pace. Max and Bella were still leading the way, but I hoped that if we kept moving, he'd just pass us and be on his way. The man did not pass us. He kept his distance, but stayed close enough to remain in sight. I kept an eye on him, trying not to worry. Max and Bella were well behaved, but I still felt nervous with somebody lingering behind us. I decided to take a break by a small creek that ran alongside the trail, hoping that would give the man a chance to move ahead. I sat down on a large rock and let Max and Bella drink from the creek. The man stopped a short distance away, just out of earshot. He watched us while pretending to look at the scenery. I could see him fiddling with something in his backpack, but couldn't make out what it was. After a few minutes, he approached us, saying, "Nice dogs you have there." His voice was too smooth, and his eyes didn't match the friendliness in his tone. I tried to be polite, but kept my answers short. He asked if I had been to the trail before, and I said yes. He then started talking about other trails in the area, but his suggestions seemed random and out of place. I felt like he was trying to keep the conversation going for some reason. My instincts were telling me to leave, so I quickly stood up and started walking again, hoping that he'd take the hint. As we walked past where the man was sitting on the rock, both my dogs growled softly as we went by. This was shocking to me, as they never growled at anyone, and it kind of certified my distrust in the guy. He followed us up the trail, keeping his distance but never quite falling behind. I could hear his footsteps on the gravel trail behind me. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I was on a well-traveled path and there were usually other people around. Soon the man got closer. He then asked if we were heading to a specific spot on the trail. I told him we were just out for a casual hike and didn't have a destination. He seemed to accept that but continued to follow us, asking more questions about where I was from and how often I hiked. As the afternoon wore on, the trail became less populated. The man moved back behind me. I passed a few people who greeted me here and there, but the man did not interact with them. He kept his distance, but I could sense that he was always nearby. The woods were getting quieter and it was getting late. I knew I needed to start heading back before it got dark. I decided to cut the hike short and head back to the trailhead. I hoped the man would eventually turn around and go in a different direction. Max and Bella seemed to sense my anxiety and stayed close by my side for the rest of the hike. Finally, I reached a more populated section of the trail, and the man did not follow us past this point. I felt relief, though I didn't relax until I was back in the parking lot. When I did, I looked around, but the man was nowhere to be seen. I drove home, feeling grateful that nothing more serious had happened. To this day, I can't forget how unsettling that encounter was. I still hike, but I'm more cautious now. I always try to stay in a well-traveled area and pay close attention to anyone who seems out of place. Max and Bella are still my trusty companions, and their presence always makes me feel safer. I was doing an internship many years ago and staying in the basement of a friend's house. The house was located far from town, in a mostly wooded area. Behind the house, about 50 feet away, was a mile-long path through the woods. I would walk the path on nice days and enjoyed the serenity of it. One night, over dinner, I mentioned to my hosts that I had seen what appeared to be a house in good condition about half a mile away. It was a setback from the path on the opposite side, with no obvious access to any local roads. I didn't trespass at all, and would never stray from the trail to check out the house. I could just see the house hidden in the woods from my viewpoints on the trail. When I asked about the house, the only information the people I was staying with gave me was, "Oh, that's our neighbor. He's a hermit and hardly ever comes out. Nice guy, but best to leave him alone." That's all they said about it, so I figured, yeah, no problem. All I would do is walk on the mile path and not stray away from it. A few days later, I was on the path, and as I neared the section where the hermit lived, something caught my eye. I saw movement in the woods by the hermit's house, so I turned my head and saw a man completely dressed in an all-white outfit. His pants, shirt, and hat were all white. My first thought was that he kind of looked like Colonel Sanders. The man was slowly walking through what looked like a garden in his yard. He stopped and looked right at me, so I gave a friendly smile and short wave and kept going. On my return walk home, he was nowhere to be seen. The next week, I went out for another walk on the trail. This time, as I got closer to the same section near the house in the woods, I felt like I was being watched. It was more intense than I'd ever had that feeling before, so I slowed and listened very carefully, trying to casually glance around the woods. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw it. About 20 feet ahead of me, perched on top of a thin dead tree trunk, just below eye level, was a dirty and mutilated doll's head. It might not sound like much, but it was freaky. I looked at it, made an obvious nodding gesture, deliberately turned around, and went the other way back home. I never took another walk through that woods trail for the rest of the time that I stayed at that house for my internship. I was just that freaked out by the hermit and his house in the woods. Not too long ago, I took the scariest hike of my life. It was supposed to be a simple walk in the mountains and a chance to escape. My friends and I had been planning this trip for weeks, and despite the rain in the forecast, we were excited. We started on the trail around noon. The sky was overcast, but it wasn't cold. The trail we chose was a well-trafficked path in the foothills, known for its beautiful views and relatively easy terrain. The plan was to go up a few miles, take a break at a scenic overlook, and then head back before dark. We had been hiking for about an hour, and I decided to take a short break on a rock beside the trail. My friends continued ahead, planning to wait for me at the overlook. As I sat there catching my breath and drinking some water, I heard something that was strange. It was a soft rustling sound not too far away. I looked around, expecting to see a deer or maybe a small animal, but instead, I saw something far worse. There, emerging from the bushes about 100 feet away, was a mountain lion. The mountain lion didn't seem to notice me right away. It was slowly moving along the trail, its head low, sniffing the air. I knew mountain lions were dangerous and had read many stories of people seeing them and even being attacked by them, but I never thought that I'd encounter one. I slowly reached for my phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The mountain lion was getting closer, its gaze now focused in my direction. I knew that shouting could provoke it, and running away would likely trigger its chase instinct, so I just sat there frozen. I then heard a loud noise from the trail below. It sounded like a group of people talking and laughing. It was a group of cyclists riding up the trail. They were a large group, probably a dozen or so, and they were making quite a bit of noise as they rode. The mountain lion seemed startled by the sound. It paused, looking in the direction of the noise. I watched, barely able to breathe, as the lion's attention shifted. The cyclists were getting closer, and as they did, they were shouting to each other and ringing their bells. The noise and commotion seemed to unsettle the mountain lion. It turned and looked back at me briefly, and then, as the cyclists approached, it bolted into the underbrush. The cyclists, now riding past me, noticed me sitting on the rock. They slowed down, some asking if I was okay. I nodded and told them what had happened. They were all shocked, but relieved to hear that I was unharmed. They said they had seen the lion on the trail, so they started making all the noise to try to scare it away, but didn't realize it was so close to me. I quickly joined my friends at the overlook and told them about the entire encounter. They assured me that it was rare to encounter mountain lions, but it's always a good idea to be aware of your surroundings and make noise when hiking to avoid such encounters. As we made our way back to the trailhead, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The noise of the cyclists had saved me, and I thought that if I ever saw a mountain lion, I wasn't supposed to make noise. If they hadn't shown up when they did, the situation could have been much worse. That moment on the hiking trail was by far the closest I had ever been to dying, and the image of a mountain lion ripping through me scares me enough to stay away from hiking now. I live in a quiet neighborhood. One thing that I like to do is go for walks whenever I get the chance. Typically, I walk down to the end of my street and either walk down a nearby street or walk through a local park. I go a lot at night because I work during the day, and when I get home, I'm always too hungry and tired to go walking right away. Walking at night has never bothered me. Sure, it might seem a little spooky at times, but the neighborhood that I live in has always seemed very safe to me. There's not a lot of houses on the street, and it rarely gets any cars. There also aren't any busy streets in the immediate area. Many people walk their dogs during the day, but at night, it's usually just me walking. I know most of my neighbors. I even know a few people from nearby streets. Everybody is always really nice. So this story took place probably a month or two ago. After getting home from work, I had some food and relaxed for a bit. Then, I got the itch to go for a walk. I wouldn't walk every single day, but probably like 3 or 4 nights a week on average, depending on the weather. When I left my house to start walking that night, it was probably 8 p.m. I walked down my driveway, which is pretty long. My yard is about 2 acres, and most people in the area have at least an acre of property. It's kind of a wild area, and there's also a small woods in my backyard. I walked to the end of my street, which kind of curves, and then was going to walk down another street and through the nearby park. When I reached the end of my street and had just turned onto another, I saw a man walking. He was entering my street, and I only looked at this man for about 2 or 3 seconds. He wasn't looking at me, but I didn't recognize him. He appeared as though he was starting to walk down my street, and I kind of wondered who he was and what he was doing. It was just really unusual for somebody to walk down the street at this time. But then again, that's what I was doing. What was more unusual is that I didn't recognize him as living in the area, so why would he be walking down my street? The man was wearing a baseball cap type of hat and had a sweatshirt on. He did not look at me at all, and I was already headed in the other direction when he came into sight. After that, I kept walking. I made it to the park several minutes later and was going to walk around there for a while. It was usually pretty interesting to walk through it. I ended up walking around the park area for probably 30 minutes or so. It was quiet and I was the only one there the entire time. The only sounds I heard were occasional squirrels running through the park and crickets off in the distance. After that, I headed back to my street. I walked the distance back all the way to my house. It took maybe 15 minutes total to get back to my house from the park. But as I was on my street walking and approaching my house, I heard something. I was maybe 40 feet away from my driveway and could see into my front yard. The sound was coming from my front yard, and it sounded like maybe an animal was running through my yard. I heard a bush moving near the front of my house. It wasn't very loud, but I heard it because of how quiet it was outside. When I looked into the direction of the sound, at first I heard nothing. There were several trees and bushes scattered around in my front yard. I stopped walking and stood where I was, looking. The noise had sounded like a larger animal, but I didn't see anything. I took a couple of steps forward to get a better look. When I did, I saw something move. I kept looking, and though it was dark out, I finally saw it. There appeared to be a man sort of hiding behind my bush. I noticed that it looked like the same man that I had seen walking down my street earlier. Now this was a little strange. I was sort of concerned. Why would some guy be hiding in my front yard? I slowly took a few steps closer to my driveway. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I could try to walk up the driveway into my house, or I could decide not to. I was really worried what the man was trying to do though, and I quickly decided that I was not going to walk up to my front door. I kept walking past my driveway down the street. When I made it out of the man's sight, I decided that I needed to get into my house. I couldn't just walk around all night. I decided that I was going to try to get inside, and I kept walking further down my street. Then, I entered the yard of one of my neighbors a few doors down from me. I walked past their house and into their backyard. There was a wooded area that spanned the distance of a few of our backyards, including mine. I made it to the woods in my neighbor's backyard and then entered it. As quietly as I could, I walked through the woods in the direction of my backyard. The woods was not too dense, so I was able to walk through it pretty easily and not make too much noise. It was very dark out, but I knew that I was moving in the right direction. It took me about 5 minutes, but eventually I had now made it into my own backyard. I walked over to the edge of my woods. My house was less than 100 yards away. I got my house keys ready and then began sprinting to my back door. I would be able to unlock that and get inside, hopefully without the man knowing. I was pretty sure he was still in my front yard. The mistake I made though was that I ran. I wanted to get there quickly, but looking back, I should have just slowly and quietly walked through my yard. Running definitely made a lot more noise. When I made it a little more than halfway there, I heard a noise coming from around the front of my house. I could hear that someone was now walking around and headed towards where I was. I kept running and finally made it to the back door. I still had to unlock it though. As I stood at the back door and scrambled to get the key in, I looked over. I saw the same man walking around from the side of my house. When he saw me, he changed from a walk to a run. I was able to get the door unlocked and I opened it. Then I slammed it shut as fast as I could behind me and locked it. About a second or two after the door was locked, the man reached it and tried opening it. I looked out the window, and after he realized that the door was locked, he turned and ran away. I went to the front of my house and looked outside to make sure that the man was leaving. Sure enough, he ran back down my driveway and into the street. After that, he walked out of sight. I decided that I would call the police on him, even though he had left. I didn't think much could be done, but I'm glad that I still reported him. I haven't seen the guy since then. The whole situation was really surprising to me because I never thought something like that would happen in my neighborhood. I still go for walks, but I'm really careful. I walk through city parks all the time. I've lived in a major city for many years, and I walk just about everywhere. Many times it's at night because I work really weird hours. A couple of years back, I was on my way home. I had just picked up some food to eat at a restaurant that was about a 10-minute walk from my apartment. It was nighttime and dark out. Things were fairly quiet. On the sidewalks, there was still a decent amount of other people that were out, but I decided to take a shortcut through one of the parks that was nearby. Parks were almost always much quieter when it was dark out. I was going to be walking on a path that went right through it. There were many trees, a little woods along one side, and some areas of open grass, benches, and tables. I would have maybe 5 minutes of a walk through this area. On this night in particular, about a minute into the park, things were very quiet. I was the only person around, but soon I heard a noise. There was a stretch of dense woods to my left, and it sounded like a large animal was just inside of it. I thought it was an animal because of the noise being in the thick woods, but it could have been a person too, I suppose. It sounded like they moved a few feet into the woods, and then deeper in, and got a little bit behind me. I looked over and saw some leaves and branches moving, but didn't see who or what had made the noise at all. I kept walking, and I wondered what it had been. It was just unusual for a large animal to be in this section of the woods, although I guess it was possible. I thought that maybe it could be a person, but that seemed pretty strange too. I walked further along the path. I would say about 2 minutes after that, I then heard footsteps behind me. They were a ways back, maybe almost 100 feet, but I could hear them. The more I walked though, the more the footsteps seemed to be getting closer to me. It became a real concern when whoever was behind me sounded like they were now only about 50 feet back. I had been walking at a pretty average speed, but certainly not slow. I quickly glanced behind me to see who was there. I couldn't see all that well because of being in a park at nighttime. I could tell that it appeared to be a man though. He was wearing a jacket with the hood up, and he was looking down, so I couldn't see his face at all. This didn't make me feel any better. In fact, I was more worried now. I walked a little bit faster. He continued to gain on me though. I only had about another minute of walking through this park before I would be back in normal city sidewalks. I just wanted to make it out of that park because I knew when I would, there would be other people walking around. The man kept getting closer and closer. By the time I could see the end of the park, he was only like 15 feet behind me. He started to speed up more, and I made a run for it when I was closer to the sidewalk. I made it, and I watched the man go out of view behind some trees in the park as I walked out onto the sidewalk. Immediately, I saw several other people walking down it as well. I felt instantly better, and the man was still inside the park. I didn't know what he had been trying to do, but I was just happy to be away from him. I continued walking back to my apartment, which was now only a few blocks away. After walking on the sidewalk for a short time, I turned to another street. I was really close to my apartment now, but this street was much quieter. I walked on that sidewalk for maybe a minute, and with my building in sight, I'm not sure why, but I decided to look behind me. I hadn't heard anything, but for whatever reason, I just decided to look back. I honestly was not expecting to see the man there again, but he was there. He was a long ways behind me, probably like 100 feet again. I couldn't believe it. I turned and literally started sprinting for my building. When I had made it to the doors, I looked back. The man was walking towards me, about 30 feet away. I quickly used my key fob to get inside of my apartment building and made sure that the door closed behind me. I didn't wait to see if the man would try to come inside. I went straight over to the elevator and went up to my floor. Soon, I got inside my apartment. I was really creeped out and couldn't believe that I had seen that man again. I went over to my window and looked out to see if the guy was still out there on the street. Sure enough, he was. I saw him walking away down the sidewalk. Unfortunately, I didn't realize how obvious I was being. I wasn't ducking down or anything behind the window shades. I was just standing there looking outside. As the man was walking away, he happened to look up and seemed to look at me. I quickly closed the shades and moved away from the window. I looked out of it again about an hour later, and luckily the man was gone and out of sight then. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm really glad he didn't get into my building. This is a strange thing that happened to me not too long ago. I was out for a walk one night, trying to get my steps in. I have a fitness tracker, and I try to walk at least 10,000 steps per day. Sometimes I'm able to get that amount early on, depending on what I'm doing. Other times, I'm forced to go walking at night or something like that. I typically get there pretty easily, and it's only here and there that I'm left trying to get them later. This story takes place on one of the days where I didn't have that many steps though. It was nighttime, probably 9 o'clock, and I only had about 5,000 steps. The weather happened to be really nice out, and I decided that I would go for a walk outside to get my steps in. At first, I was a little unsure of walking at night, but then I thought, why not? And I decided to just go for it. My house is in a pretty typical neighborhood. It's a quiet street with a bunch of houses on it. There's also many other streets similar to mine, and it's a very large neighborhood overall. I left my house and began walking down the driveway onto my street. It was a calm and quiet night for the most part. Obviously, nobody else was out walking or anything like that at this hour. I walked to the end of my street and then went down to the next one over. I didn't really have a plan on exactly where I was walking to. The only plan I really had was to just walk down nearby streets until I reached maybe 8,000 steps or so, and then I would head back. By the time I got home, I would either be at 10,000 steps or very close to it. When I was walking down the next street over from mine, I noticed a car turning onto it. I
I didn't think anything of it. I moved close to the side of the street as there were no sidewalks to walk on. The car approached, but it was traveling extremely slow. It had to be going less than 10 miles per hour. This did seem kind of strange and raised a little bit of concern, but not a whole lot. I was walking in the direction of the car and it was driving towards me. It took a while, but soon the car passed me by. I didn't bother to look over and see who was driving or anything like that. The car drove past me and then turned onto the next street. I kept walking. Eventually, I made it to the end of the street that I was walking on and went to the next one over. I made it almost entirely down that street before seeing the same car again. It was still driving slowly, but a little faster than before. This time, it was driving in the same direction that I was going. It came up from behind me and passed me by. I didn't look over this time either. I walked down one more street and I reached my 8,000 steps. Then I decided to turn around and head back to my house. But when I was walking back, I couldn't believe it, but I saw the same car again. This time, it was weird because the headlights were off. The car was driving in the same direction that I was walking again, and it was moving extremely slow behind me. I was waiting for the car to pass me, but it didn't. After a while, I looked behind me. The car was seemingly following me, driving at about the same speed that I was walking at. It wasn't right behind me, but a little ways back. I was getting really suspicious now. When I got to the end of the street, I turned to the next one. My street was just one more over from that. The car, of course, followed me. I didn't know what to do. When I got a little ways down that street, with the car still following me, I stopped, turned around, and looked at it. The car stopped as well. I kept standing there, and the car was sitting there a ways away. Neither of us were moving. I still couldn't see who was driving the car. Between it being dark out and the car being kind of far away, I just couldn't see. Then the car started backing up. It went in reverse for a short distance before stopping and turning around completely. Then the car drove off. I didn't waste any time and began walking quickly back to my house. I was expecting at any moment for the car to drive down the street another time, but it didn't. I didn't know what their deal was, but I just wanted to get back home. After walking quickly down the street for a while, I actually started jogging. I don't like to run, but I felt that it was necessary. I made it home much faster than if I had walked, and once I was inside, I felt much better. I thought about it for a while, wondering who was in that car and what exactly they were doing. The story doesn't end there though. Not quite. Maybe an hour after I returned home, I was casually walking into my living room when I glanced out the window. I noticed that there was a car sitting in the driveway. The lights were off and I recognized it as the same car. Immediately, I got the creeps. Why were they at my house, and how on earth did they know where I lived? The car was just sitting there in the driveway. I couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. I hoped that they weren't prowling around the house or something like that. After standing by the window and watching for a while, I walked over to the front door. I decided to turn on the light to the outside area in front of the driveway. After turning it on, about 10 seconds later, I heard the engine to the car start. The car then backed up with the lights still off and then left my driveway and sped away. I was glad that it was gone, but feared that it would come back again. I checked the window several more times that night, but the car never returned. Ever since that night, I haven't seen the car again, which I'm happy to say. I still wonder about it though, and have a lot of questions. Who was driving the car, and why were they following me? How did they know where I lived, and why were they parked in my driveway? I don't have any of these answers, but I'm just glad that I'm all right. I remember the date and time the scariest night of my life happened to me. It was between the hours of 9 and 10 at night on Thursday, July 6th, 2020. So this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. This happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At around 9 p.m., I started doing my laundry, starting with the washing machine, which takes around 20 to 30 minutes to wash clothing. With that amount of time to spend, I decided to go outside for a walk around my neighborhood for a nightly breeze while listening to music on my phone wearing earbuds. I was on my way back to the house around 15 minutes before 10. I was walking through a small highway that had no lampposts. It was pretty creepy going through a dark highway with nothing but trees on both sides and hearing the sounds of crickets chirping. I sprinted towards the area with some lampposts that had some lights on. Then I slowed down to walk back to the house. With about a half of a mile to go, I was on the right side of the road when a white car coming the opposite way slowed down. Then the driver's window lowered and the man yelled at me something involving my wallet. I didn't understand what he had said to me. But then he spoke again, telling me he wanted me to drop my wallet. Not only that, but I also saw he was holding something to me. couldn't see what it was at first. I have bad eyesight, so I wear contacts, but I wasn't wearing them during my nightly walk. I didn't even think before then to wear my eyeglasses either. Then it hit me in my mind. The way he was yelling at me to drop my wallet and what he was holding in his hand, I highly believe he pointed a gun at me. I sprinted away back to the house, scared in the back of my mind that he was going to shoot at me or take a sharp U-turn to chase me. I was wearing a white sleeveless shirt, long jeans, and waterproof boots, but I ran without tripping. When I was sprinting, I also looked back every few seconds hoping I wouldn't see the same white car, and I didn't. I made it back to the house, sweating and reflecting on what had just happened to me for the first time, being someone who was never in a situation like that before. Never in my life would I ever think I would be a victim of an attempted robbery. What makes this even scarier is I didn't have my wallet with me. I wish I got the model of the car, the name of the brand, and most importantly, the license plate to report him. But I was too scared to know about that in my fight or flight response, and it would actually be pointless now since I made it back alive and I wasn't followed. This has taught me a lesson, that is, to try and avoid going outside at night, and if you do, to be careful or be with somebody you trust. If you're looking for time to kill during an indoor chore that takes waiting, do something that doesn't involve going outside. Either way, be aware of what happens in situations like this and be safe. Learn from this if you do go out at night. Never go alone. However, I wonder what would have happened if I didn't figure out what was going on longer, or if I told him that I didn't have my wallet. I believe that if I didn't know what was going on any longer, chances are I wouldn't be here. This happened at the last apartment that I lived at. The complex was just one building that had about 10 units in it. It wasn't too big and was affordable. I lived by myself in a one-bedroom place, but one of my favorite things about the apartment was the surrounding area. It was near a lot of stores and things like that, but directly behind the apartment was a walking trail. The trail was sort of long and went through the woods connecting to a nearby park that was popular for people to go to during the summer. When I was bored sometimes or wanted to get some exercise, I would walk on the trail. That's what I was doing one night. It was the early springtime, so the sun set pretty early still. My best friend was coming over to hang out when he got off of work, but until then, I had some free time. I had been busy all day and wanted to get out for some fresh air, so I went to walk on the trail like I had many times before. The path started out going along the back part of the apartment property and then went into long portions of woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes and assumed that I would be the only person out there in the dark, but I soon heard the sound of footsteps moving behind me. They sounded like they were maybe 40 feet back at least, just close enough that I could hear them. After a few steps, I realized it was kind of weird for somebody else to be walking at night, but then again, that's exactly what I was doing. I kept walking, but when the footsteps behind me sounded like they were getting closer, I decided to look back and see who was there. When I looked, I heard some rustling of leaves and then saw nobody was there. It appeared whoever had been walking behind me had gone into the woods to hide. Now, this was very suspicious, and I suddenly felt as though I may be in danger. I decided it would be best to find an opportunity to head back to my place. I couldn't just stop and go back, or I would run into the person, but there was a spot coming up where the path split, and one of the paths connected back. As I walked, I soon heard whoever was there get on the path again. I started walking a bit faster. Finally, I saw the path turn into two paths, and I went left. I walked on this for a minute or so until there was an option to connect back to the other side, so I walked on that and was now headed back to my apartment. Whoever was behind me seemed to be getting closer. I turned around again. Once more, whoever was there jumped into the woods. This time, I barely saw part of them as they disappeared. It appeared to be a man, and all I could tell was that he was wearing a dark gray sweatshirt and brown pants. When he was in the woods, I started suddenly running as fast as I could back to my apartment. I didn't look back the entire time at all. At last, I made it back and quickly used my key fob to get inside my apartment building. Then, I was able to feel safe again in my place. I texted my friend, and he said he would head over to my place because he had just gotten done with work. This meant he would be there in roughly 10 minutes. I began making some food because I was pretty hungry, and I lost track of time a little bit. When I looked at the clock, I realized that it had been over 10 minutes, and I figured that my friend was there. I left my apartment and walked down the hallways and then down the stairs to the side door. The side door was the main door that me and my friends would go to instead of the front one. It was just closer to my unit. I walked up to the door and saw someone standing there who I initially assumed was my friend. When I got close though, I realized it wasn't. It was a man in a gray sweatshirt and brown pants, and I knew that he didn't live here. Then I remembered the man from the woods. This guy was wearing the same thing, and I knew it was probably him. I'd never seen him before until tonight. He was right up against the door, looking inside, right at me. I was maybe 5 feet away from him. He then tried opening the door, but it was locked. I ran back upstairs to my room and went for my phone. I called my friend, and when he picked up, he said he was just driving into the parking lot now. I told him about the guy, and he told me that he saw him. He wanted to go and ask the guy what he was doing, but I convinced my friend to wait until the guy left before coming in, and just to be safe, my friend went in the front door. I only went walking out on that path a few more times the rest of the time I lived there, and when I did, I certainly never went at night. This happened last year when I was on a road trip. I traveled quite a bit and was going on a 1.5 week long trip to see some friends that live out west. It would take me 3 days to drive there and 3 days to drive back. As I was driving there, I'd like to stop at cool parks along the way for hiking. It was a good way to stretch my legs after driving all day and get some fresh air. There were also some really cool spots along the way. I did that a couple of times on the way down. There's so many cool parks, especially when you get out west. I remember that after visiting with my friends for a few days, I was driving back home. On the third and final day of my road trip driving home, I stopped at a park that had a hiking trail. I got there by taking an exit and driving a little ways down a road. This park seemed pretty quiet, but it did have a parking lot. After I parked my car, I started walking down the path. It was a really good trail. It went uphill and then through a little bit of woods, and then down another hill. I was taking my time because I had left my hotel early that morning and was well on pace to get home at a decent time. This was one of my favorite walking paths that I had been on in the entire trip as well. About 30 minutes in though, I heard a noise. It was coming from way off the path, and I had to look around some trees and tall grass to figure out where the noise was coming from. It sounded like a man was yelling. I stopped and listened closely. The yelling was getting louder and louder. Then I realized whoever it was getting closer. It was a man, and he was yelling at me. Finally, I saw him emerge. He had white hair and a white beard and sunglasses on. He said that I was on his property and I needed to get out of there. I was really surprised. I had been 100% sure that I was walking on public land on a hiking trail. This man seemed really angry, and I told him that I didn't know this was his land and I thought it was public. The guy said that I was just BSing him, and then he started running at me. I told him sorry and basically started running back the way I had came with the guy chasing after me and yelling. I ran all the way back to the parking lot where my car was. The man was not nearly as fast as me, so I got away from him really quick, and when I got back, I looked around the parking lot. I was the only car in it, but it had several signs as if it were a public area. I thought for some reason the park trail must go into people's yards, although the entire time I was on the path, I never saw one sign saying private property or anything like that. As I was sitting in my car and about to leave, I saw a truck enter the parking lot. It drove wildly and then went right next to my car. When it parked, I saw the driver's window was rolled down and the same guy was already yelling at me through it. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I knew that it would be best to leave, and I backed out and drove away. I drove back down to the street, and the guy in the truck started following me the whole way. I really didn't know what I had done to make him so angry. I can understand if it were his property for him to be angry over somebody being on it, but he should know that it was an honest mistake and just be happy that I left. I hadn't argued with him or anything like that. There certainly was no need to follow me back out to the freeway. I assumed that once I exited and got back onto the freeway, he would stop following me. But I was wrong. When I merged on, his red truck remained right behind me. I kept driving the way home, which would take me about 4 more hours until I was back. It was about 10 a.m. at this time. An hour went by, and the guy was still behind me. When I changed lanes, he did. When I slowed down or sped up, he did as well. I was in disbelief, and I thought about what I could do. My gas tank was starting to get low, and I knew I would need to stop. I really didn't want to have to confront this guy again. Then I had the idea to call the police. I didn't know what they would say, but I figured it was worth a try. I dialed 911 on my cell phone and told them the whole situation. I let them know the road I was on and the area, and I was told they would have someone investigate. About 10 minutes later, I saw a police car sitting on the side of the road. When me and the red truck behind me passed it, the police car pulled out and flashed its lights. The red truck pulled over, and the police car did as well. I kept on driving. I had a follow-up phone call with the police a short time later. They told me that the guy in the truck had now turned around and was no longer going to follow me, and I was free to keep driving home. This made me feel better, and I arrived home a few hours later. When I got home, I researched the exact area that I had been and looked it up. I even ended up calling somebody from that city the next day to find out if I was on public land. What I learned was that I was in fact on a public trail and there was no private property in that vicinity. This means that I was never on the guy's property. It kind of creeped me out when I realized that. I don't know who that guy was or why he was claiming that I was on his property. I also don't know what he planned to do by following me for such a long time. Luckily for me though, I never have to find out.